Hello and welcome to another Brawl video. This week my supporters on Patreon voted for Quandrix the Proof as our commander. What they did not necessarily know is how I was going to build the deck. If you take a look at our mana curve, you'll notice we only have 2 cards with mana value 5 or less. Those 2 cards being Temporal Manipulation and Time Warp, both allowing us to take an extra turn after this one. And that's pretty convenient when our commander has Cascade, Quandrix a 6 mana, 6/6 Flying Trampler that's now guaranteed to cascade into an extra turn card. Now we get to untap with at least 6 mana, and instant and sorcery spells we cast from our hand also have Cascade thanks to Quandrix, meaning we now get to potentially cast another 6 mana instant or sorcery, which once again is guaranteed to cascade into the remaining extra turn card. So we get another attack with Quandrix, another extra turn. We now might get to untap with 8 or more mana, and from there it's usually not too difficult to get the game over with, especially considering that there's a bunch more extra turn cards that we can try to chain together, and then our opponent may never get to untap again. So yeah, that's pretty much our plan in a nutshell. Since we're not playing any cheap cards, we also get to free roll Keruga the Macro Sage as our companion, as another way to draw a few extra cards and maybe put an extra creature into play. And then while we technically don't have any cheap cards in the deck, there's still a lot of ways to get around that restriction. Cards might have the Aftermath mechanic, so their mana value is technically the sum of both halves. Same with the Room cards. You also have adventure creatures that might be expensive on the front side, but then have a cheap adventure we get to deploy in the meantime. There's cards with a prototype mechanic, or cards with cycling or channel abilities that we get to use early on. So there's still a lot of ways to get around the mana cost restriction. So then I've split up the deck into a few categories here, starting with cheap cards that we can use to interact with the opponent or just spend our mana in general. And then we've got other cheap ways to ramp, often at 3 mana, so we can hopefully get to Quandrix before turn 6. And then our third category are expensive instants and sorceries for the most part that we're looking to cast once Quandrix is already on the battlefield. And then we've got all our extra turn cards, which are going to hopefully just seal the deal for us once we cast a few of them. And then the mana base has 54 lands total, so this deck has a lot more lands than you would typically expect, since we really do not want to miss any land drops in a deck like this, where we need to get up to 6 mana at least, and sometimes even more. And then a very important land that's worth mentioning is Mystic Sanctuary, which requires us to have 3 islands in play to enter the battlefield untapped, but then when it does, we get to return an instant or sorcery card from our graveyard on top of our library. So this can get back a Manipulation or Time Warp, since they don't exile themselves, and then now with Time Warp back on top of the deck, if we cast a 6-drop with Quandrix in play, we're guaranteed to cascade into it once again, or we can simply draw into it on the following turn, and that's another extra turn that could make the difference. So fetching enough basic islands early on to enable the Sanctuary is also very important. So yeah, that's pretty much our deck in a nutshell. Now for the deep dive, starting with our early interaction. Mouth to Feed can just make a 3/3 token, maybe Feed with Aftermath can draw a few cards. Commit to Memory is an interactive spell for 4 mana. Now do keep in mind, if we cast Memory with Aftermath, it's not going to trigger Quandrix, since Quandrix specifically wants us to cast spells from our hand to have Cascade. The Gatekeeper has a 2 mana adventure to bounce a creature back. We also have an instant speed version with a Sword Coast Serpent. The Whale can also maybe bounce an attacking creature back, and the River Regent has an Omen to draw 3 and discard. We've got both Armadillo and Herd Migration to discard themselves for 2 mana, get a basic, and gain 3 life. There's Commandeer, which can also be very fun, as we can potentially cast it for free by pitching 2 blue cards from our hand, and then we get to gain control of target non-creature spell and choose new targets for it, so that can potentially redirect an opposing counter spell or removal spell that's trying to mess with our plan. Then we also have the Mirror Shell Crab, can be channeled to counter an opposing spell unless our opponent pays 3. Then we've got the Waker of Waves, basically a 2 mana cantrip if we discard it, looking at the top 2 cards, putting 1 in hand, 1 in the graveyard. And then the Sky Turtle can also be channeled to either bounce a creature or return a card from our graveyard to our hand, so it can also maybe get back one of those Time Warp effects. And then the Meat Locker can keep an opposing creature tapped down by putting 2 stun counters on it as well, but Drowned Diner can also maybe draw and discard. Then moving on to our ramp section, we've got a lot of effects that can put an extra land into play, with Spring to Mind. Again, if we cast Mind out of the graveyard, it's not going to trigger Cascade on Quandrix, since it's not cast from our hand. Then we also have the Greater Tanuki, which can be channeled to get an extra basic. Beanstalk Giant with its Adventure can get an untapped basic land. Altanak requires a fetch land in the graveyard, but then for 2 mana we can discard it to get that land back into play. We also have the Moldering Gym, which is a room which can be used to get an extra basic. The Wait Room later can also make a larger creature. Then we also have the Cradle Clearcutter with Prototype, which can tap for a green. Shifet Monitor can be cycled, not only drawing a card, but now also putting an extra land, basic land or desert into play. Verdant Mastery can be cast for 4 mana as opposed to 6, and then it will also give the opponent an extra basic, but it's often still worth it. Then we also have the Vestige, which can be warped, which will often draw us an extra card and put an extra land into play in the process. And then a few more cyclers here with a Lurker and Tusker, both drawing a card if we cycle them, but also making an Eldrazi spawn token which can be sacrificed for an extra colorless mana. And then Jotzi can also be cast as Journey to the Oracle, putting any number of land cards from our hand onto the battlefield, and with 54 lands total, odds are that we'll still have 1 or 2 left. And then we move on to our expensive instants and sorceries, including a lot of mass bounce effects. Crush of Tentacles will bounce all non-land permanents back to hand. That also includes Quandrix after we've maybe attacked with it. But if we enabled Surge, we also get to make an 8/8 Octopus token in the process, and it will still hopefully cascade into an extra turn card, so we've got more time to set up. Then we also have Flood of Tears, which is pretty similar. Fairy Slumber Party will just bounce all opposing creatures back to hand, making 1/1 fairy tokens in the process. River's Rebuke just bounces all non-land permanents, including creatures and non-creatures on the opponent's side. Sublime Epiphany has a lot of different modes, but can often be used to copy a creature, maybe counter a spell. Then the Turtles in Time, another mass bounce effect that also gives us the opportunity to draw 7. Seagate Restoration, either a land or a way to draw a bunch of cards. Wisdom of Ages, a way to buy back all instants and sorceries from our graveyard, so that can also get back our Time Warp and Manipulation at the very least. Treasure Cruise and Dig Through Time, card draw spells with a Delve mechanic, can also potentially high roll into another extra turn card. One with the Multiverse and Omniscience are not really going to be cast all that often, but if we do manage to get them down, they can often lock up the game for us, especially once we get Keruga in play to draw even more cards, and then hopefully string together some extra turns from there. And then we've got all the extra turn cards, of course the 5-drops being incredibly important. Usually do not want to have them in our opening hand, but of course we can always cast them as kind of an expensive explore, if you will. And then we've got Temporal Sundering, can also bounce something in the process. Part of Waterveil, if we awaken it, can also make a 6/6 land to close out the game with. Alrund's Epiphany now is the unnerved version, so makes 1/1 bird tokens no matter what. And Expropriate can also take multiple extra turns, whereas Temporal Trespass is another Delve card, so we can also potentially cast it on the cheap, but still potentially cascade into other expensive spells thanks to Quandrix. And then at the mana base, as we mentioned, Mystic Sanctuary is one of the most important ones that we want to focus on, so want to prioritize getting islands into play. And then we've got a few other utility lands like the Mistrise Village to make spells uncounterable. The Channel lands can offer a bit more interaction. Castle Garenbrig can be useful if we need to pay the commander tax on Quandrix if it gets taken out. And then we've got some random life gain. Cavern of Souls to make our commander uncounterable, of course, and then lots of Scry and Surveil lands throughout. The Pylons also happens to be a desert for Shifet Monitor. And then the Fountain Port can also maybe make a treasure to speed things up. We've got the Gemstone Caverns, which is great if we're on the draw, if it's in our opening hand. And then I'm also playing the package of Sunken Citadel with the Gold Saucer. So if we draw both, we could already start making treasures on turn 2 if we win the coin flip. And then, as I mentioned, lots of Scry and Surveil to try and improve our draw steps, find interaction early on, and once we've got enough mana, look for more extra turn cards instead. So yeah, that's our deck. Now let's jump into some games and see how the deck does. Okay, we're on the draw, facing Silverquill the Disputant. So a casualty control deck. Our hand's got the 2 Eldrazi Cyclers to ramp, and then Serpent for interaction, Vestige for more ramp, and more importantly, a Gemstone Caverns on the draw. So definitely going to keep. One of the Eldrazi can go. And then Castle enters tapped, although now I can get a Surveil land instead. Or a Breeding Pool if we need to bounce something. Opponent will have a bit of a tokens theme. Dark Ritual could already set up Silverquill on turn 2. which unfortunately for my opponent runs into the Serpent bouncing it. So I'll get a breeding pool and send it packing. So that undoes the Dark Ritual. And now can go ahead and play the castle and plan to cycle the Tusker, making a spawn token in the process. So not the most reliable form of ramping, but might still get us to 6 mana in the first place. Now we can expect a decent amount of removal from the Silverquill deck. So if they can answer Quandrix, then we don't get to attack during those extra turns. So that could potentially be an issue. Find the Regent. And part of Water Veil. So this turn we could draw with a Regent, which is maybe more likely to find more lands compared to warping the Vestige. But let's see what's on top. A land. Alright, I guess now Vestige is fine. So we'll just warp it as opposed to casting it, even though I can cast it thanks to the castle. Is that worth it? I would have a 7/5 in play, but then I don't get to trigger its ability. I think we're warping it. And then the Delta can get another island, perhaps. So then we would already have 2 for Mystic Sanctuary. Silverquill is back. So yeah, opponent is now tapped out. So unless they have like a snuff out, we should be good to go. Alrighty, so fetch island. Play Restoration as a land so we can keep the spawn. Cast Quandrix. Head Manipulation. And then part of Water Veil is guaranteed to hit another extra turn card. Although it looks like they might actually have the Snuff out here, which would be a bit of a setback. Could also be Solitude. Opponent takes 6. So now we can part a Water Veil. Hit a Time Warp. So we've got 2 more turns queued up. Still no removal. Get in for 6. Or I can play the Regent to bounce, which is also fine here. If I go for Keruga, I could still cast a Vestige, which is maybe still better. And then next turn I can Regent to bounce. Okay, so this would be my last extra turn, although now I can also just cast Omniscience. Thanks to the spawn. And then with Keruga and Regent, we can set up a ton of card draw. Draw 3, cast a free Dig Through Time, which has Cascade, hitting a Waker of Waves. And then Expropriate seems like a good one. Sky Turtle can also get an extra turn card back if we cycle it, or channel it rather. Expropriate into Mouth to Feed. And yeah, this game should be over. But yeah, Regent can also be cast, bouncing Keruga back to hand so we can replay it, draw even more cards. Steal your Silverquill. And attack. So yeah, this game was pretty one-sided despite the early Dark Ritual. On to the next one. Okay, we're on the play, facing the Forest Guardian, Hei Bai, 5-color shrines. So yeah, let's look for some more acceleration. Got the Tanuki, so I'll keep. Don't expect a whole lot of interaction on the stack. So this should be a winnable matchup, if they're not off to a crazy start, that is. And then can start with a tapped Restoration or a tapped Village. Need to get the castle in play before we can channel Tanuki. And then I want to get as many islands in play as possible for a potential Mystic Sanctuary. Opponent's gonna ramp. Alright, so we'll pass with Tanuki available. Keep our opponent guessing. Could technically also have the Mirror Shell Crab to counter their commander. Opponent goes for the Sanctum first. Do I still need to get an island, or do I want a second green? I think I still prioritize islands, even though castle will require some green mana if we want to maybe use it to recast Quandrix a second time. Now the Vestige can also be warped, and that's another way of getting ahead of mana. Village is tapped at the moment. And then Pylons lets me surveil. Okay, so I could also cast a Verdant Mastery. Armadillo is not a priority. So if they tap out and we feel like they're not holding up removal, then we can go for Quandrix. Otherwise, it could behoove me to wait a little bit longer. And draw Temporal Trespass. Yeah, the Sanctum can also tap things down if we're not careful. So there's a few things to consider. Opponent does have kind of the removal colors up. So I'm not opposed to just a 6 mana Verdant Mastery. Now I can get the forests. And then it's going to be easier to chain together a whole bunch of spells. Sithis for card draw. Ascension to airbend. Can also airbend their own commander and replay it, which is what they'll do. And they found the Sanctum of All. That's a problem, so now we want to make sure we try and get the game over with. They could still have a Source to Plowshares in hand, but I think it's beatable. So, play Quandrix. No need to use the castle, is there? 4, 5. I've got 3 cards in graveyard. I guess it doesn't hurt to use a castle, but I don't think I'll be able to use the Vestige alongside it. Yeah, mana short. Take an extra turn. So I can just put Keruga in hand. Is there a Swords end of turn? Not yet. So I'll start by attacking. So far so good. Alright, so if I cast a Crush of Tentacles, I'm guaranteed to hit another Time Warp. Whereas I'm not with a Trespass, although of course Trespass does take an extra turn. So I guess I don't mind the Crush. Could also make an Octopus if I play Keruga first, which seems fine. Although it could backfire if I draw into my 5 mana extra turn. Luckily did not. So then cast it with Surge. Because yeah, it looks at the spell's mana value and not the Surge cost. So we still cascade into a 5. So then we also send the opponent's permanence packing. And our opponent scoops it up, yeah, get an 8/8, take an extra turn, and then Trespass can take another extra turn, and then Wisdom of Ages can also get some of those extra turn cards back. Sweet, on to the next one. Okay, we're on the draw, facing the new Alchemy Commander that plays a bunch of X-cost cards. This hand is missing some actual ramp, so let's take a mulligan. This one still doesn't ramp. We have Vanguard to maybe blow something up, and then commit at 4 mana. Feels like I can do better. Okay, this is an improvement. So then, kind of like the Serpent to bounce on 2, Crab to counter on 3, but then I have to get rid of a land here. Yeah, I mean, we get to Surveil with the Pylons, we've got a pretty high land count. So I feel like this is okay. So then hide out, get an island. Opponent starting with a Hedge Maze. Commandeer could be fun. So for opponents maybe sitting on a counter spell, we can use Commandeer to counter it back. So now we're ready to use the Serpent to bounce their commander. And Epiphany, yeah, maybe that's good enough. Although if I foretell it, turn 3 I'm not going to be able to keep up the crab. And I do want to bounce their commander. And this turn keep up crab. And our opponent can suspect something's up since we didn't put Keruga in hand. But this will still slow them down quite a bit. And then next turn we can cycle the Monitor. Already have my 1 desert in play. But can get another island for Mystic Sanctuary. And Armadillo can also get an extra land. So, yeah, I think I'm still leaning Monitor here. Because if I draw land, I can already cast Quandrix. Might see them replay their commander. No, it's going to be the Arthropod. And now Ingenious Prodigy. Okay. So at least they're not keeping up a counterspell. As far as we know, there's some free ones now in the format. And drew a tapped Citadel, but now an untapped Forest. So yeah, let's go for it. Cast Quandrix. Take my extra turn. I don't have a 6 mana instant or sorcery in hand to necessarily follow that up, but now we can just cast the Alrund's Epiphany. And it's no longer the nerf version, so we still get the birds, even if we didn't foretell it. And then if we get lucky, we can hit another extra turn off the Cascade. Yeah, that seems worthwhile. Because then I can replay Quandrix, and that'll hit another 5 mana Time Warp. Even though I did lose some pressure. So we get to take all the turns. And Omniscience, I'm a little bit short of casting. So then we can Treasure Cruise. At the very least. And we could still get lucky. So I want to leave up enough mana where I can put a Keruga in hand for Commandeer. So let's see, 6, 7, 8. I just need to exile 3 cards from Graveyard. Definitely want to keep the extra turn cards there. And let's see what we cascade into. River's Rebuke, I'll decline to cast. So Keruga in hand, and then pass a turn. So they do get a turn to maybe get back into it, assuming it plays around Commandeer. Unable to Scream is fine. Nothing I really want to Commandeer it onto. So could discard this, could keep it to just play as a 6-mana creature. I think we've got enough creatures we can cast, so... a mouth to feed. So, can I Omniscience yet? I can. That should make things easier. So then, make a 3/3. This looks at mana value, not power. And I cannot cast things for free from the Adventure Zone. But I can, I guess, just bounce their commander. Or cast a Gatekeeper as a creature for Keruga. If I could bounce my own Quandrix, I would have, but that wasn't an option. Okay. Now, draw 3, discard. Can still go for feed to draw more. Alright, I don't think we're fizzling out here with a Seagate Restoration. So first, I guess never mind. Aftermath only works out of the graveyard, of course. So we'll just Restoration. Alright, we didn't actually find another super impactful play. So then cast this. Cast this. And then commit is also with Aftermath if we want to draw 7 with it, so... well, opponent's still at 5, facing down a pretty impressive board, and we still have Commit Memory and Commandeer in hand. No maximum hand size thanks to the Seagate Restoration. Looks like we're targeting a bunch of stuff. Is this a Doppelgang? It's going to be a Snowborn Simulacra. Okay, so let's let the Parallelist trigger happen first. Makes a Witness, and then now I can Commandeer. And then target 6 things. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. This is one way to get me to play with alchemy cards, I suppose. Alright, put one of them onto the battlefield. Can go for Quandrix again, but yeah, opponent has scooped it up. Sweet, on to the next one. Alright, we're on the play, facing Athreos, a God of Passage. So a black-white sacrifice deck of sorts. My hand has potential. Don't actually have green mana for Tanuki yet. But we've got a few Scries and Surveils to help out. Start with a Void. And a Yavimaya Coast is fine. Turn 1 Shambler. Could try and bounce it with a Whale. Not that the damage really matters, it's more about the board presence. They could also sank the Shambler to something like a Village Rite, and then fizzle the adventure, although it's not like we really care about the creature. So that worked. Good use of my mana. And the Priest is next. So this turn Tanuki. Don't have anything on the following turn, besides maybe putting a Keruga in hand. Now Bastion can drain us as creatures die. Take one from Priest. And already have 2 islands. Could still get a 3rd for Mystic Sanctuary. Although maybe the damage matters from Yavimaya Coast and I should get a forest. Okay, so could scry once again, maybe keep the Restoration in hand. Fountain gain 2. Yeah, I think we can do better. Want to look for more extra turn cards at this point. Keruga in hand. So then the Flood of Tears guarantees another Time Warp. Although also means I would have to bounce Quandrix back to hand. Alright, opponent now with a Culling the Weak, that's scary. Make 4 mana for a Bolas Citadel. Alright, we could beat that here if our opponent gets lucky. They found a land off the top, possible they've got another one, or they can maybe surveil to get rid of it, or just shuffle. So Flood of Tears is looking better now, as a way to bounce the Citadel. Opponent does indeed surveil. Gets rid of another land, but looks like there was another land on top. Okay, so Coast seems clear for Quandrix. Into Time Warp. And then we want to make sure to attack before we Flood of Tears. A manipulation, take an extra turn. Now the problem being that if I cast Quandrix again, since I don't have Mystic Sanctuary, I'm not going to be able to set up another extra turn necessarily. But at least we're not getting Citadeled anymore. So let's surveil. Say no to Fountain Port. And then if I get a third island in play, this can get Mystic Sanctuary, so regretting the forest now. I mean, I could also just Seagate Restoration and draw a bunch of cards and then regroup next turn, which seems reasonable. And then I'm pretty likely to draw an island to set up Mystic Sanctuary afterwards. Okay, so can get a Surveil land here. And then next turn, Scalding Tarn, get Mystic Sanctuary. Priest is back. Now it's possible they'll keep up a removal spell, but no, it's going to be a Blood Witch. So first get the island. Don't need Spring to Mind. So then now, and get Mystic Sanctuary. And get back Time Warp. Cast Quandrix. Cascade into it. And our opponent's gonna scoop it up, understandably. So yeah, from here we've got a ton of mana and more ways to maybe dig for an extra turn. On to the next one. Alright, we're on the draw, facing Vannifar. So our opponent's going to be cloaking some expensive cards and then flickering them to turn them face up. Have a Commit Memory as my only early interaction. No real ramp since Castle doesn't really help until we have to pay the commander tax. So feels like I can do better. This one at least has the Monitor to ramp, so on turn 5 I can already play Quandrix. Can foretell the Epiphany, so this one seems okay. Just need to make sure we don't miss any land drops. But with a Surveil, we should be okay. And we found the Commit Memory anyways. A Harrowing Swarm is next, can manifest, so another way to make face-down creatures for them to flicker. Or any permanence, really. Could be staring down an Omniscience next turn, for all we know. And I'll keep the Forest. So this turn, Foretell. Since we have Keruga's Companion, there's no keeping up appearances. Although, for 3 mana, we could have the Crab as kind of a counterspell. So there are some cheaper interactive options out there. Opponent's gonna flicker their face down card and It was indeed an Omniscience. Well, now we're getting totally stomped by Jin-Gitaxias into Curabus the Sea God. Yeah. Well, that's pretty unlucky. So the game should be decided now. Yep, I get to play my land, put a Keruga in hand, and then discard everything to Jin-Gitaxias. Take 13. Opponent runs out some signets. At least the Mind Stone draws a card, so it's a bit better when you have an Omniscience out. But we should be very much dead. Opponent can even steal a land next turn. So yeah, that was pretty much the best case scenario for the Vannifar deck. Turn 3 Omniscience. And yeah, that's not getting cast. Alright, GG's. They get to steal my land. No point in tapping it since our opponent gets to untap it anyway. And an attack will do it. Alright, on to the next one. Alright, we're on the draw, facing Rofellos. This is definitely one matchup where I'm not going to feel bad about chaining together extra turns. We're on the draw, which means that the Meat Locker is probably not good enough, since our opponent would get to untap with at least 6 mana with Rofellos before we can tap it down. Although it's not like my deck has a ton of cheap interaction to deal with Rofellos that I can count on. The only drawback is that I also don't have any ramp. But I get to Surveil, and then Meat Locker for Rofellos, so... especially if they delay it for some reason, this could work out. I'm gonna Surveil, even though Scalding Tarn can also get Mystic Sanctuary. Alright, opponent goes for Rofellos. So yeah, this is gonna hurt next turn. Also possible they've got a protection spell now with the birds. Okay, Gatekeeper was actually one of our best draws. So now I can try to bounce Rofellos, and then if they replay it, next turn lock it down. Unless the birds represents a hexproof trick, it does not. So, yeah, so far so good. Can go ahead and Surveil. Keep the Monitor, that's ramp. So we went turn 2 interaction, turn 3 interaction, turn 4 ramp, turn 5 Quandrix. At least that's the plan. Opponent does still have 5 mana regardless for an Overlord. That's beatable. So yeah, can Fabled Passage for an island, and then Shafet Monitor. So they don't necessarily know to expect Quandrix next turn. So now 7 mana for a Green Suns for 6. I'm guessing Primeval Titan. Sure. Yep. But if all goes to plan, it's not going to make a difference. So I guess there is a Yavimaya, so I don't even have to fetch with Fabled Passage. But I wouldn't mind getting an island here. Cycle, get another island. Untap, play Quandrix. And a Commandeer could also be fun. Quandrix hits my extra turn. River's Rebuke guarantees that I find another one. Although I'm not guaranteed to expropriate. But yeah, opponent's gonna scoop it up regardless. So yeah, one more attack gets our opponent to 12. I get to untap and draw. I only have 7 lands in play, so we're 2 lands away from expropriating. So that probably wouldn't be happening. But yeah, unless I draw another extra turn card, can maybe draw with a Regent, Armadillo can get a land, and then there's a chance I'll be able to expropriate on the following turn, but our opponent would of course get to untap in the meantime. But having bounced all their stuff, it's not like we're in danger of dying. So yeah, I'll take it. On to the next one. Okay, we're on the play, facing a Sliver Weftwinder. We have a hand without any early acceleration really, so worth it to take a mulligan. Now we've got the Whale as interaction. Migration doesn't ramp, but finds a land. Maybe this is good enough. And then we've got a Surveil to maybe find some 3 mana acceleration. Temporal Manipulation, I don't want to get rid of, but it's not a card I necessarily wanted to draw, because now we don't have it left in the deck to cascade into. But it can get me from 5 mana to 6 mana. And I guess with a Sanctuary I can maybe buy it back as well. Deathrite makes that a little bit harder. So we'll pass. Plan is Migration for an island, since we need 3 for Sanctuary to come online. So our opponent can cast a 3-drop, exiling their fetch land. And a Blur Sliver for haste is a good one. Although I don't hate using the Whale now. That'll slow them down. Okay, so could main phase the Migration to get an island. And then play it so I can maybe hang on to the Sanctuary in case we draw another island. Otherwise I can just go for Keruga in hand, play this tapped. Now a Cabaretti Revels. Okay. Actually drew Prismatic Vista. So don't have to fetch just yet, but I can go for Keruga. And then end of turn get an island. Or wait until my draw step. So we can cast a Manipulation, and then I can maybe get it back with a Sanctuary. So our opponent can cast their commander. No shortage of fetch lands for the Deathrite Shaman. And there's the Weftwinder triggering Revels. And Mauler, another Changeling, so technically a Sliver. So a bunch of things happen. I'll take my draw step. Would have been happy with another land actually. So play Otawara, play Manipulation, take an extra turn, untap, and then actually if I go for Sanctuary now I get to put the Manipulation on top. So then if I cast Quandrix I will cascade into it, and then I'll have another 5 mana extra turn card left in the deck. So then Part of Waterveil takes 2 extra turns. So that worked out. And then Temporal Trespass is getting close. So we've got 2 extra turns queued up, which is already lethal with our opponent at 16. Since I can just attack 2 more times. But yeah, Temporal Trespass could have taken 1 more extra turn. On to the next one. Alright, we're on the play, facing Omnath, a landfall deck. Pretty broken commander in general, so it's not going to be easy. We've got a Clear Cutter as mana acceleration, although as a creature it might get removed. Gatekeeper to maybe bounce an opposing creature, but most of the ramp is probably just putting extra lands into play. So, even though I've got some castable spells, I feel like I can do better. And this one has potential, still missing the ramp, but I've got a Scry and maybe a Surveil to help out. You have a Maya. I guess I'll keep, I do want some more lands. And then I want to get as many islands in play as possible for Mystic Sanctuary as well. Opponent's got the Elvish Mystic. So yeah, might have been able to bounce it with our first opening hand. Now the Meat Locker can maybe tap it down. Time Warp in hand is not ideal, but it is a way to get from 5 to 6 mana. And then with the Sanctuary we can maybe get it back. Opponent's got a Cabaretti Revels. Let's Surveil. And Part to Water Veil. More extra turns, I guess, doesn't hurt. Assuming we can get to 6 mana in the first place. So then I might be forced to play the Sanctuary, put Keruga in hand next turn, and then Time Warp into Quandrix into more extra turns. So I do not want to miss a land drop here, that would be pretty sad. Ashling into Halfling. Alright, Fabled Passage means I can now get an island, and then I'll have the 3 islands required for Mystic Sanctuary, so that could be one more extra turn. So yeah, hopefully our opponent doesn't have any counter spells. Omnath trigger Revels. Put in a Kami. So they do have a blue mana up, could be Wash Away, which can counter either Quandrix or the card we cascade into, since we did not cast it from hand. Now with an extra land, they could have all sorts of interaction. Just hoping they tap out instead. Alright, Leafkin Druid, trigger Revels. So unless they've got a free counterspell in hand, we should be good to go. The birds doesn't really stop our Trampler. So play Time Warp, target myself, and then can wait on the Mystic Sanctuary. Play Quandrix, hit the only card left, Manipulation, and get to untap, attack, and then Mystic Sanctuary, put back Time Warp, cast a Temporal Sundering, and that's pretty much game over here. I'll take an extra turn, bounce your birds, cascade into another Time Warp. And then Part to Water Veil for one more extra turn, so we get to 15 damage. And this is not going to cascade into anything. Alright, I mean, our opponent got to have a few turns early on, but yeah, once we cast a Time Warp, the game was over. On to the next one. Okay, we're on the play, facing the Ancient One, so some sort of graveyard deck. This hand is pretty bad. This one has a Tanuki, and then we're just a blue card away from a Commandeer, so that could be fun. Start with a Surveil. And then we can always put Keruga in hand to enable the Commandeer as well. Could also be used to counter an opposing counterspell, basically, that can otherwise prevent Quandrix from hitting the battlefield or taking an extra turn. Turtles in Time. It is another blue card. Don't expect to need to bounce a bunch of creatures necessarily, so I'll wait. And now the Beanstalk Giant's good too, so sure, let's gain 2. Get another island for Mystic Sanctuary purposes. Suppose this getting an untapped land could have been more useful in a later turn, so I could have also gone for Tanuki here. And now the Serpent can bounce the Ancient one. So yeah, can just pass the turn with Tanuki and Serpent, or keep Serpent to enable Commandeer. And then, yep, we'll see. Epiphany is a way to maybe take another extra turn with a Quandrix in play. So yeah, had I gone for Tanuki first, then this turn cycle I could have gone Beanstalk and put Keruga in hand. So I get to pitch Serpent and Keruga to Commandeer while keeping Epiphany. So it might have worked out a little bit better. Opponent with a Rusko next. Okay, so they'll still have a blue mana up. Tanuki can get a forest now. And don't feel the need to bounce anything. Okay, so try Quandrix. Looks like we're good to go. So extra turn acquired. Opponent's got a Snuff Out. Sadly, Snuff Out says destroy a non-black creature specifically, so commandeering it is not going to help, because our opponent's creatures are all black. So that's a bit of a bummer. Alright, so I'll just have to recast it next turn, which I can, since we ramped twice. This cry is not going to matter. Treasure Cruise. I don't necessarily want to draw. So try this again. Hit our second 5 mana extra turn card. Okay, so now I get to attack. And then Temporal Trespass. Cascade, hitting a Mouth to Feed. So an extra 3/3. Alright, and then Flooded Strands can get Mystic Sanctuary, which means that if I now Sublime Epiphany, I'm guaranteed to cascade into it. So that's huge. So, yeah. Opponent knows what's happening and scoops it up. So yeah, we get to take most of the turns in the games today. Definitely not a deck I would recommend if you're looking to make new friends, but if you're just in the mood to combo people out, Quandrix is not a bad way to go about it. So yeah, that's going to do it for today's gameplay. Want to thank you for watching, hope you enjoyed, and as always, have a nice day.